Hello and welcome to the Farmer Supply Association Agri Report. I'm Randy Klepechka, agronomist with Farmer Supply Association. We're taping on February the 4th, so that means it's about time to get some stuff going in the field. You know, we're still be mid to late March before any planting goes on. We got some preparation and some weed management things to need to be thinking about. You know, all these things, I'm going to talk about burn down and also wheat fertilization. A lot of these things are based more on, as far as the timing goes, they're based more on conditions than they are on the calendar. So we're going to talk about some of those conditions we need to meet before we do these things, and some things to consider before we actually make applications and do things like that to optimize everything. Talking about burn down, of course that's controlling weeds that are out there, that we want to get rid of for either planting right into the field or even to slow those weeds, suppress those weeds down where we can work the ground a little easier. The ground will dry out quicker if we burn down, and even if we don't control everything, it'll slow the growth of those weeds down where they don't take up where the ground will dry a little quicker and things like that. Hello and welcome to the Farmer Supply Association Agri Report. I'm Randy Klepechka, agronomist with Farmer Supply Association. Well, we're taping on February the 4th, so planting season is getting near. I got a couple of things that field related that I need to talk about. We're not going to be planting for a while, but still there's some things that we need to be thinking about and getting done in the field. I want to talk about burn down applications, controlling those weeds that are out there, and also wheat fertilization for those that have wheat crops in the field. These timings that I'm going to be talking about are based more on conditions than the calendar. We've got some leeway on both the burn down and the wheat fertilization. We're taping again in early February, so we've got some times to get these things done, and I just want to talk about some of the considerations you need to be thinking about. First, as far as burn down, a few things conditions we want to meet. We want the weeds to be actively growing because the herbicide's going to work better that way. Soil conditions, we don't want standing water because that makes it hard to you can't get coverage on some of those where the puddles are at, especially if the water's a little deep and the weeds may be submerged temporarily. So, we want to be able to get coverage on those for the herbicide to work. Temperatures, we'd like for temperatures preferably 3 days before the application to be in the 50s, and for at least 3 days after the application for highs to be in the 50s. We want the lows above freezing if at all possible. So, those are some conditions we'd like to meet. We want a good forecast too. If these conditions I just talked about aren't met, but we've got a good forecast where maybe next week, those conditions are going to be met, let's just wait a little while. So let's try our best to get these conditions. Sometimes you just can't because, the weather's just not allowing and time is running out. But, this early in February, we've got time to think about these things and maybe get some better conditions. I want to talk about a few of the burn down situations and some specifics about these. First, fields where fall residuals were applied. I know I got one guy in particular that I work with. He applied fall residuals back in October, and he's really happy with, these fields are clean. He may not have to do anything but plant right in it. So, I'd like for people to keep those things in mind when fall comes around. I know a lot of people don't like to spend money, especially if they don't even know if they're going to be farming next year, or certainly, on certain farms. So, but, keep that in mind. Those fall residuals can keep you from having to make a burn down application and really have you in planting condition, right away from the start. One of the most common situations that we see in burn down is the grass broadleaf combination, the winter grass like a bluegrass, and there's a bunch of winter broadleafs that we'll see. So it's usually a mix of the grass and the broadleaves, so there's several possibilities right here. We normally want Roundup in that mix, especially with these applications that are this time of year. Later in the spring, when we start getting pigweeds up and some other weeds up, we would like maybe to switch to gramoxone, possibly in some of those situations because of its activity on pigweed. And there's some other options as well on some of those broadleaves. So, but right now we're going to base everything on Roundup. So, like a Roundup 2,4-D combination is very good in these scenarios. The plant back for 2,4-D is 21 days for rice, 14 days for beans, and 7 days for corn. Other options, especially as that plant back narrows in and we're getting close to planting, we've got to think about switching from 2,4-D to other things. So Roundup Sharpen is a very good mix. Sharpen, as long as you're just staying at that 1 ounce rate, there's really no plant back on any of our common crops, so you can just go do that and plant right away. So Roundup Sharpen is again a good combination for this situation. Roundup First Shot is another one that has a fairly narrow plant back, not as narrow as Sharpen, but 7 days for soybeans, 14 days for corn, 0 days for rice. So Roundup First Shot is another option as that window gets a little narrower. Another newer herbicide we haven't dealt with very much is Elevore. So Roundup Elevore is another one that has a 14-day plant back for all three of those crops, for rice and soybeans and corn. So that's another thing we can think about. So those are some of the possibilities, again with the plant back, which is going to be a determining factor besides what weeds are out there. So consider those different combinations of burn down applications. The third situation is ryegrass, and we talked back in the fall about putting a residual out there to keep that ryegrass from ever coming up. Some people did and they were happy with it, but a lot of people don't do that, as I said. So if you've got ryegrass out there, that's a little different situation. Again, if you didn't use those fall residuals, probably the first choice is going to be clethodim. The clethodim products like Section 3 is one that we sell. You can apply these pretty effectively all the way till the joining stage of that ryegrass. Once we get past that, the clethodim loses, the Section 3 loses some of its activity. So again, we want to get that sprayed pretty quick if we're going to do that. If you're going to use clethodim, let's get that done and not let that ryegrass get totally overgrown before you do that. Because once you get past that, really all you've got is gramoxone, and sometimes 2 applications are needed to do that, even if that does it. So again, with ryegrass, let's go with the Section 3, the clethodim products first, as soon as we can get them sprayed. And then if that fails or you just can't get them sprayed in time and the ryegrass is getting away from you, then we've got to look at something like a gramoxone application. So those are some of the common burn down scenarios. There's other products out there. I could spend an hour talking about all the products available, but we only got 10 minutes. So that's some of the most common scenarios, the most common products used. So if you've got specific questions about other things, well, feel free to give me a call on those. I'd like to finish up by talking about wheat fertilization. That's one of those things another thing that we consider in February. It's another one of those things that's not necessarily based on a calendar date. It's based on conditions. So I want to talk about some of the things we want to look at as far as timing that wheat fertilization application, and just some rates and things like that. First, I think we need to prioritize our later wheat. If we've got some wheat that was planted up in November, it hasn't tillered good yet or something like that, then that's probably where we need to be really focusing our priorities on trying to get something out there maybe a little sooner. If it's wheat that was planted early, it's really well tillered and developed, and I think we need to buy some time on that. I mean, that's where we've seen some of those freeze injury issues in the past when we had late freezes. So, let's not push the fertilization too much on that wheat that's further developed, but more concern ourselves and prioritize that later wheat that hasn't tillered well. As far as conditions and soil conditions, obviously we don't want standing water. We really don't want soupy mud out there. We'd love it to be dry, totally dry, but that's hard to get in February. So the way I describe that, we want that ground to be able to accept water. You put that fertilizer out there and the ground's dry enough that when it rains, that rain is going to push that fertilizer down in the ground. If that ground is really soupy, muddy, it's just going to kind of melt on top there, and then it's prone to loss. Plus, it's not getting down to the roots very well. So, again, dry enough to accept water, preferably totally dry, but that's usually doesn't happen that often in February. As far as the rates we'd like to see, kind of the base rate is 120 units of nitrogen. You can go a little higher if or you've got some history that you feel confident that you can get an economic response out of going higher rate. Well, by all means do that. I've got one guy who's really looked at his issue numbers before, and he tells me that he can go up to 140 units and feels like he gets an economic response up to 140 units. So when you know stuff like that, by all means do it. If you don't know that, then you may just be wasting a little bit extra fertilizer. On the other hand, if you've got some really poor yield potential ground and it just doesn't have the yield potential out there, you may back off a little bit. I've seen people go down to about 90 before. So, 90 where there's poor yield potential, 140 if you know you can get a response to it, but generally in that 120 unit range is kind of where we want to be at. As far as we like to see the application split into at least 2, sometimes 3. I generally go with 2. The problem I have with 3, there's certainly nothing wrong with 3, but I have a hard enough time getting 2, nitrogen applications timed. It seems like with the weather, rainfall, wet ground, standing water, wind, you name it, whatever the case may be, it's just hard to get 3 timed in a good way. So I generally go with 2 applications. One, as I said, sometime in February, depending on the stage of the crop and the weather conditions, soil conditions, and things like that. The second one generally around joining, the joining stage, which is maybe 10th, 15th of March. It depends on the year. It varies quite a bit. I've seen joining in February, and I've seen it in mid-March. So try to time that second one around that joining stage. That way we have most of that nitrogen out there by that time. So that's kind of the timing part of it. As far as a urease inhibitor such as Agritane, there's other brand names out there, but if you're using, if the ground is wet and it's warm, I think you might want to consider a urease inhibitor. If it's cold and it's fairly dry, you're not going to get a response from that urease inhibitor. So again, the warmer it is, the wetter it is, the more likely you are to get a response from that urease inhibitor such as Agritane. Sulfur, most of our wheat, of course, is grown on sandy ground, and if it is, you definitely need sulfur out there. If it's not real sandy, kind of more of a mixed ground, then 1 sulfur application may be just fine. But on some of this sandy stuff, especially like I deal with up in the Tuckerman area on some of that sand, I think you need a sulfur application every time you go across that field with nitrogen, because it's so prone to leaching that if you don't, you're going to run out. So again, like sulfur applications, I like to see a total, sulfur application of about 30 units, and again, split into however many nitrogen applications you make. And I think if you'll do that, you'll avoid that sulfur deficiency. Those top leaves turn yellow, and it's really hurts your yield. So let's try to avoid those situations by putting sulfur out there in pretty much every nitrogen application, especially on sandy soil. So again, we're in February. We're getting close to farming season. So just a couple of things I wanted to mention. Again, burn down and wheat fertilization. And next week or next month when I tape, we're going to be getting close to planting time. So until then, this has been Randy Klepetchko with your Farmer Supply Association Agri Report.